la parte mejor del hombre es la razón, o como quiera que llamemos a aquella parte de nosotros que por naturaleza parece ser la más excelente y principal. Y poseer la intelección de las cosas bellas y divinas, pues la razón es o algo divino o ciertamente lo más divino que hay en nosotros. Por tanto, su actividad, según la capacidad que le es propia, será la felicidad completa. Eso es lo que dice Aristóteles en su famosa Ética a Nicómaco. En este libro, Aristóteles busca de alguna manera explicar cómo llegar o cómo el hombre puede llegar a la tan ansiada felicidad. Y serán los griegos, que forman parte casi del gen de Occidente, del origen de Occidente, quienes buscarán la respuesta a esta gran pregunta, que muchas veces nos excede: ¿cómo conseguir la felicidad y qué es la felicidad? Por un lado está Aristóteles, que acabo de leer, pero también están los filósofos estoicos, quienes planteaban que la mayor felicidad es poder valerse por sí solo o valerse por sí mismo, sin necesidad de apoyo. O están los epicúreos, con el gran Epicuro, que plantea la felicidad como la búsqueda de un cierto placer o de un goce intelectual y sensual de la existencia. Y a pesar de que la felicidad ha sido el norte de esta búsqueda intelectual y espiritual en Occidente, sin embargo, parece que en Occidente no somos felices. Parece que en nuestro país, a pesar de buenos índices económicos en relación al resto de América Latina, no somos felices. ¿Se puede conseguir la felicidad? ¿Es la felicidad medible? ¿Es posible aplicar políticas públicas que ayuden a la consecución de esta ansiada meta? Para tratar de responder a esta pregunta, contamos aquí en el programa Una Belleza Nueva con un invitado muy selecto, Karma Tshiteem. Karma Tshiteem es presidente de la Comisión de Felicidad del Reino de Bután. Quiero en primer lugar agradecer a Karma Tshiteem su presencia aquí en esta conversación, darle la bienvenida a Chile y lo primero, pedirle brevemente que nos cuente de su país, de Bután, un pequeño y hermoso país que ha sorprendido al mundo planteando algo absolutamente original, que es reemplazar o más bien complementar el famoso PIB, el Producto Interno Bruto, que es con el que normalmente se suele medir la felicidad de los pueblos y las sociedades, por un índice que se llama Felicidad Interna Bruta. También se podría decir que el hecho de que sea presidente de esta Comisión de Felicidad es casi como si fuera un ministro de la felicidad. Eso para nosotros es una novedad, es algo absolutamente original. En primer lugar, quiero preguntarle que me diga un poco cómo es su país, que nos haga ver aparecer. Yo tengo un mapa aquí donde voy a mostrar la imagen, primero esta primera imagen de Bután vista en un contexto más general, rodeado de unas montañas extraordinarias, tan extraordinarias como las nuestras. Tengo también acá, ustedes pueden fijarse en la ubicación de Bután, que está muy cerca de Nepal, muy cerca fronterizamente de la India y muy cerca de China. Es decir, realmente este pequeño reino ha sobrevivido con sus costumbres, con su historia, en un contexto que no debe ser fácil.
Thank you very much, Christian, for firstly having me on this show. Bhutan is a small country, as you just said. We have a population of about 700,000 people. Geographically, we are in South Asia, and Bhutan is a landlocked country. On the north, we have China, and on the south, we have India. And as you said, we are on the eastern Himalayas, and basically the Himalayas end in Bhutan. Bhutan's history is long, but our modern history actually started only in 1961. That's in a sense when we opened our doors to development. And the first motorable road we started making, and the first cars came to Bhutan in 1961. And since then, now we have had over 50 years of development or modernization. And our great fortune has been having leadership in the form of the kings. We are a monarchy, or we were a monarchy until 2006. From 2008, we became a democratic constitutional monarchy. And in fact, it was our fourth king, the king who made us a democracy and who has since abdicated in favor of his son. He was the author of this approach to development called gross national happiness. And in fact, it was in 1972 when he first articulated this idea. And he said, GNH is more important than GDP. And his basic belief was that if people want to be happy, then his job as a king and the role of the government and development should be to create conditions to enhance their happiness.
También he escuchado historias sobre ese rey, me parece. Es un rey muy compasivo, un rey que parece que ha practicado la sencillez o la pobreza. Cuenta la leyenda, no sé si será verdad, que decidió vivir en una cabaña en vez de un palacio. ¿Cómo es ese rey? ¿Cómo es esa figura del rey? Porque nosotros, cuando pensamos en la palabra rey, nos imaginamos un gran monarca con mucho fasto, con mucha pompa, con mucho lujo, con mucha ceremonia. ¿Cómo es un rey? ¿Cómo es este rey de Bután?
He's an extraordinary person. And in fact, when we refer to him, and he's very greatly adored by all the Buddhist people, we refer to him as an enlightened king, because his actions are not that of an ordinary man. And like you say, yes, he lives a very simple, frugal lifestyle, and he still lives in that same log cabin, even today. And he took us on a journey where he had absolute power as a king, but he slowly gave the power back to the people. And in 2006, he gave us a written constitution. He also made a retirement age for the king, but he himself retired very early. The retirement age for the king is 65, but he retired at 52. And he handed over his throne to his son, who now rules Bhutan. And since 2008, we've become a democratic constitutional monarchy. We have a democratically elected government.
¿Es cierto que entre los asesores del rey hay un consejo de astrólogos? ¿Y qué papel juega la astrología dentro de la definición de políticas, de poderes o de decisiones importantes en el país? ¿Qué tipo de astrología es?
As Buddhism has a pervasive influence on every aspect of Buddhist life, so we do consult astrologers for a lot of the important things we do. We believe that in everything you do, you must have an auspicious start. So for that purpose, we consult astrologers. But for making decisions, basically the king used to depend on the council of ministers that he had appointed.
Yo leí al comienzo un fragmento del gran filósofo griego Aristóteles, que está en el origen de la historia occidental, decía, de la filosofía occidental, y planteaba a la razón como el gran instrumento para llegar a la felicidad. Desde una mirada más budista, y budista de raíz de Bután, ¿cómo se entiende la felicidad? Desde la mirada budista, de la cultura y de Bután, digamos.
Well, we understand happiness in actually very simple ways, that it's a basic desire of every person to not want to suffer, to not want to undergo pain. And therefore, the opposite side being that you want to have peace, contentment. And this, when we talk about happiness, we are not talking about fleeting pleasure. We are actually talking about something which is long-lasting and deep. Very simple view we have actually. I think nothing as complex as what Aristotle discussed about. Most of our people for a long time were just very simple farmers living a very day-to-day existence of quite a lot of drudgery, subsistence. You produce something, you just have enough. But it was a good life. Standard of living quite low, but life was good. Social interaction was strong. In a Buddhist village, everyone knows everyone, and they led a happy life.
Da la impresión de que en Bután se han preocupado de, usted lo decía al comienzo, de de entrar al mundo moderno, conectarse más con el mundo, de abrirse, pero de entrar gradualmente y con una cierta sabiduría. Entiendo que hay un control, por ejemplo, del turismo, buscan un turismo de calidad, no que se llene de turismo el país, y uno siente que hay una búsqueda de un equilibrio entre tradición y modernidad. ¿Por qué y cómo se da ese equilibrio?
We feel balance is key to everything. And in fact, even to sustainable development at the global level, I think we have to find balance. If there is imbalance, by definition, it's going to lead you to unsustainable patterns. So we seek in everything we do balance. Role of public versus role of private sector. There also you need to find balance. And more recent events of financial catastrophes show the problems of imbalance. When you leave it too much to the market, too much to the rational behavior of human being. But that actually doesn't work because there are so many forces at play. And so for all this reason, we see that in whatever we do, there is wisdom in always finding the appropriate balance. In terms of development, of course, development pace in Bhutan is also picking up. You cannot really control the forces of globalization, development, modernization when you educate all your children, when you have internet, when you have 60 channels of TV streaming all sorts of things. So, of course, there is this challenge. But we feel that you can find the balance by pursuing a development which places enough emphasis on economic aspects which are necessary for good jobs, keeping unemployment low, keeping inflation low, but that at the same time we can also continue all the good things that hundreds of years of Buddhist, generations of Buddhists passed down, like our culture, which is very critical for a sense of identity, which is very important for a sense of well-being.
Esa misma vestimenta muy hermosa y muy armónica también que usted lleva, a ver, explíquenos cómo se llama y cuál es la tradición, de dónde viene.
Well, as far as I can remember, Buddhists always wore this. It's called a go. And ladies wear something which is more full length called a kira. And this in Bhutan is formal wear. It's like wearing a suit in the West. Any formal place, you must wear the go, or ladies the kira. But of course, if you go to bar or discotheque, you can wear jeans or whatever. But this is how we balance modernity and things we value, like our tradition, which is important for our identity.
Usted habló del equilibrio, de la armonía. Los griegos tenían un término para hablar del desequilibrio, de la desmesura, cuando algo rompía las medidas, que es la hubris, la desmesura. El ejemplo de la crisis financiera, ¿no? Cuando se disparan los valores en la bolsa, se separan de la realidad. ¿Hay en el budismo tal vez, o en el pensamiento budista, algo parecido? ¿Hay algún concepto que nombre esa idea de desmesura, de desequilibrio?
Well, we don't have a term for imbalance as such. But in fact, we actually have more the focus on balance. And in fact, if you're familiar with Buddhism, what Buddhism preaches is about the middle path, which is about avoiding extremes. And it's this idea that in the right quantity, in moderation, even poison can be medicine. And that in the wrong quantities, even medicine can be poison. So in everything, that is the wisdom we are trying to carry. And in our development, we see that wisdom is as true and as relevant. And so in our policy making, we always try to find the middle path. Extremes is what you need to avoid. By definition, it's going to take you to not very good outcomes.
¿Cuál es su mirada o su visión del occidente moderno? Yo decía al comienzo que los occidentales hemos alcanzado en algunos lugares del planeta, porque hay pobreza en otros, desarrollo económico, y sin embargo mucha gente parece no estar feliz. Se da la paradoja de que hay más riqueza y no hay felicidad, pero seguimos buscando más riqueza y no encontramos la felicidad. ¿Cómo ve usted el occidente, entre comillas, moderno, a pesar de que hoy día el mundo está más globalizado, pero cómo lo mira usted desde Bután?
Well, we see in the modern West a lot of good things, a lot of good things, and I think we must never forget that. For instance, for a long time, people, the chances of living after you're born beyond the first year was extremely low. And in our parts of the world, it was very common for a family that had 6 children to lose 3 to 4. It was, people lived at the most about 40 to 50 years. And most of that time they spent in sickness. We did not have conveniences of technology like mobile phones. So in a place like Bhutan, where many of our villages are still not connected today, just to go and do some work, you have to walk 2-3 days and then find that person is not there. Great inconveniences which today are easily addressed because we have a technology of mobile. You can just call up and say, where are my yaks, where are my cows, have you seen, I've lost 2 of them, and someone might have seen. So there's so many good things that modernization and Western development has brought about. And I think that has really helped to improve really quality of life to a degree that, especially in Bhutan, my parents and grandparents could never imagine. Tremendous benefits. But what we see is, on the other hand, that there has been some imbalance. And the imbalance has been that it has been very good on aspects like health, education, income, but not paying enough aspects to the non-material needs of development. And that not paying attention to the non-material needs like psychological well-being, strength of communities, culture, the basis for people's identity, work-life balance, time use. Not paying attention to this, even though there's many benefits, it's also created problems. Because eventually for people to lead a good life, they need very good income, they need good health, they need good education, but they also need time to spend with family and friends. They need time to have time for themselves to reflect on life, like your program does. You need time to do the things which you care about, like maybe healthy activities like going and playing football or taking a walk with our loved ones. But in modern development, a lot of these are now becoming casualty to the single-minded focus on increasing income and therefore having to work longer and longer. And I think that imbalance is what we need to correct. But a lot of the good things, I think those must continue. The scientific advancements must continue. And countries like Bhutan, we benefit greatly from that. But on our part, we want to offer the wisdom of having balance, that people at the end of the day can benefit from whatever you provide, but don't forget these other aspects, which today are being affected because you're ignoring them. Because government policies affect everything. You know, if you have encourage private car ownership, everyone is driving one person, one car, then social fabric will get weaker. If you have 6-lane highways, very less chance of people interacting with each other. But if we invest more in parks and football fields, hopefully there'll be more social cohesion and greater community, and as a result, greater happiness.
Y esto se lo pregunto y me hace mucho eco lo que usted está diciendo, porque, por ejemplo, nuestro país, dentro de Latinoamérica, ha alcanzado índices económicos satisfactorios, un desarrollo económico que podría hacernos sentir orgullosos, y sin embargo hay cada vez más insatisfacción, más molestia en una parte de los ciudadanos. Leí un índice ayer que un 40%, un 38-40% de las personas que trabajan no alcanzan a llegar temprano a sus hogares y acostar a sus hijos, hacerlos dormir o leerles un cuento, ¿no? Y están cansados, se declaran cansados y estresados, ¿no? Y eso pasa tal vez justamente por redefinir qué consideramos como bienestar en un país o felicidad. Y ahí viene el punto de este planteamiento original que planteó el rey de Bután de designar una comisión que buscara índices, que buscara formas de medir y de potenciar la felicidad en su pueblo, es lo que se llama la felicidad interna bruta. Brevemente quiero explicarle al público que aquí en Occidente nos acostumbramos a medir el bienestar a través del PIB, del PIB, que es el valor monetario de la producción de los bienes y servicios de un país durante un periodo, ¿no? Ahora, es interesante que el creador del PIB, que es Simon Kuznets, que vivió entre el año 1901 y 1953, fue muy crítico él mismo de la manera como se usaba su propio instrumento de medición y dijo muchas veces de que era pretencioso pensar medir el bienestar solo con el índice per cápita que venía del PIB. Dice, en un discurso en el año 34, Simon Kuznets dice, es muy difícil deducir el bienestar de una población a partir de su renta nacional per cápita. Y luego va a insistir, años después va a decir, hay que tener en cuenta las diferencias entre calidad y cantidad de crecimiento, entre sus costos y beneficios, ¿no? Y los objetivos de más crecimiento deberían especificar de qué crecimiento se trata y para qué. A mí me parece bien interesante que el mismo creador del instrumento que muchas veces hemos usado como, hemos divinizado prácticamente como instrumento, hay algunos en Occidente que han hablado de la religión del dinero que se ha instalado en Occidente, el mismo que la creó la pone en duda. ¿Qué le parece a usted esa reflexión de Kuznets, el creador del PIB?
No, absolutely. I think I totally agree with his own self-criticism of GDP being used as a measure of well-being. And our whole focus on gross national happiness has been actually to try to have a genuine measure for progress, so that when you actually have progress, it actually leads to people being better off and happier, hopefully. Whereas with GDP, we know this relation doesn't exist, especially after a certain point. And we in Bhutan have always known this. We have always asked ourselves this question, that why is it GDP goes up when you cut a tree, but when you leave trees standing in the forest, which is so valuable, it has no value. But in Bhutan, our king, the fourth king, the author of GNH, he always had this wisdom. So even in the constitution, he said 60% of the country must remain under forest cover for all time, because that's necessary. That is the only way to sustain. We have to have a minimum level of biosphere to carry a human population. So we have always said that GDP as a measure of progress is really going to take us to outcomes that we are not going to be happy, and definitely it's not going to lead us down a sustainable development path. And that in many ways GDP is very important, but it's a means to an end. And the end should always be happiness, because as humans, all of us, we can define it in many ways, but at the end of the day, that which you want in life, we're using the word happiness to capture. And that happiness should be the ends, and GDP should be one of the means. And along with GDP, that you have to look at other aspects. In the Buddhist example, what we have seen is, when we look at most governments around the world, in terms of how they measure progress, that they focus on 5 things: GDP, living standard, jobs, low inflation, etc., health, education. They focus on good governance also, creating a strong democracy, and environment. I think increasingly environment does get attention. But in our conversations with our people, and when we are trying to find a true holistic measure for progress, we find that these 5 areas are important. But there's also 4 other areas which are equally important, and that for our people to lead a happy life, they need 9 conditions to be present. And out of the 4, the first one is psychological well-being, which recognizes that as human, we have a physical side and a non-physical side, or you could call it a spiritual side. A lot of development is to do with the physical side of us, but the non-physical side also needs nourishment. It can come through various activities. And if you're a religious person, it can come through an act of worship, prayer. If you're not, you can do yoga. Yoga is also very good for spiritual nourishment, keeping stress low. As you keep stress low, then your mental well-being improves, and your condition for happiness is enhanced, because happiness is eventually a state of mind. Another area is community vitality, which recognizes that people are social animals. We draw meaning and joy in our life from deep relationships with family, with friends, with colleagues, or just talking to a stranger in the middle of a farmer's market for whatever and saying, how's the weather? That kind of thing. Because we humans feel the need to connect. And when we think about the important or meaningful incidences in our life, it's always to do with other people, hardly to do with things like a car or a phone, etc. Another area is culture. We call it cultural diversity and resilience. For Bhutan, it's wearing this, it's our architecture, it's our own language, it's the games we play. We play archery as a traditional game, very popular in Bhutan. Culture is important relating to happiness, because in happiness studies show that to be happy you have to have a strong sense of self. That in turn depends on a strong sense of identity, and your culture and tradition is the foundation for your identity. What makes Chilean Chilean? That is your culture tradition. The set, particularly you could define it as the context within which you spent your formative years. That is your culture and tradition. And lastly, time use. And in terms of time use, in Bhutan we monitor the use of time between the three broad aggregates of work, important aspects for a good life: work, leisure, spending time with loved ones, doing meditation, etc., and then sleep. And since it's a true zero-sum game, if you work too much, you either have to give up sleep or you give up your family time or something. And obviously, if there's imbalance, you cannot sustain that pattern. So it's very important you have this balance. So these, in our study, we find that if all these 9 conditions exist, then you create the conditions for people to lead a happy life. But most of development in the West seems to only focus on the 5. And this is where I think the imbalance has come.
Cuando lo escuchaba usted hablar de las 4 grandes condiciones para la felicidad del pueblo, estaba pensando en nuestra realidad nacional. Estaba pensando, usted dijo, por ejemplo, el cuidado del medio ambiente. En Bután, tengo entendido, bueno, el 60% de la superficie de bosque protegida. Nosotros lamentablemente, tenemos bosques maravillosos en Chile, milenarios, y los hemos ido devastando a través de los siglos, quemándolos y reemplazándolos por bosques foráneos. Uno llega de repente a ciudades del sur de Chile y en vez del bosque nativo, estamos llenos de pinos y otro tipo de árbol distinto. Un segundo elemento, algo que los latinos llamaron el ocio, la importancia del ocio, el ocio creador, frente al negocio. Nosotros parecemos más obsesionados por el negocio que por el ocio. El tema de la cultura. Nosotros mismos hemos ido destruyendo nuestro patrimonio, nuestras ciudades, desaparecen las antiguas construcciones, destruimos rápidamente los barrios, no hay control urbano. Y todos esos elementos, cuando se van sumando, sin darnos cuenta, probablemente nos lleva a una infelicidad colectiva. Y eso explica tal vez, y eso me explica, por qué somos infelices a pesar de que aparentemente vamos bien encaminados en el camino del desarrollo económico y del PIB, ¿no? Me interesó mucho ver cómo ustedes pueden medir algunos aspectos. Yo entiendo que, por ejemplo, hay ciertos aspectos que se pueden medir más que otros. Pero el desarrollo espiritual, usted habló ahí del tiempo dedicado a la meditación. Entiendo que ustedes miden, por ejemplo, cuántas veces se puede meditar al día, cuánto reza alguien al día si es que es alguien religioso. ¿Cómo se mide eso? ¿Cómo se puede medir el desarrollo espiritual, el factor espiritual de la felicidad, en esta felicidad interna bruta?
Of course, it's difficult and it's very subjective, but I think you have to make a start. And what we have done is we have made very simple questionnaires. And basically, we just ask people very straightforward questions. Do you meditate? If you meditate, how many hours in a day, in a week, etc.? And we note this down. And we do these surveys every 2 years. Now, for policymakers, the absolute number is not important. What we're looking for is the trend. Are people getting more stressed? Are people praying less? Are people meditating less? So the trend is useful, and we see, oh, okay, people are not, meditation is going down, but we know it's very important for healthy mind, healthy body, and enhanced psychological well-being and happiness. So what can we do to improve it? So for us, it's the trend we want to study. So we carry out this survey every 2 years. We have done only 2 so far. So in some sense, we are very early stage of actually using more scientific approaches and evidence to inform policy making. But we already have some good examples. For instance, in education, to enhance psychological well-being, we did introduce meditation in all our schools from 2010. And that's because our survey showed that very few people meditate. And now even in the West, it's proven that meditation is a very good lifestyle activity. It doesn't have to go along with religion. Of course, if you're religious, you can also infuse religion practice into your meditation. but it's a very good preventive public health policy, and which reduces your public health spending. So for government, there's actually wisdom in going down this road. Because otherwise we talk about public health, but most of our spending is always when people get sick. That's very expensive. But these are cheaper ways to actually have make people happier, but also reduce public health spending. So this is how we use this work we do.
Estaba pensando que tal vez hay modelos de desarrollo que son más patológicos, o más que producen enfermedad, y formas de vida que tienden a la enfermedad. Y me gustaría saber, para ustedes, ¿cuánto es el tiempo en la vida de un butanés que ocupa la meditación? ¿Cuánto tiempo ocupa al día un butanés que practica la meditación en meditar? ¿Se ha estudiado eso?
Yes, in our surveys, this was the information we collected, and we found that most Buddhists don't meditate at all. Most Buddhists don't meditate. In fact, the first survey in 2008 showed that 93% don't meditate. In 2010, the number increased, but I think that was more due to sample size. But the general trend is majority don't meditate. And yet we are convinced that it's very good to boost psychological well-being, reduce stress. So which is why we introduce it in schools. And as you know, many behavior we learn in school becomes part of lifestyle. So we hope 10 years later when we do this survey, we will see different results and that people can benefit from it.
Ahora, esta forma de medir la felicidad de un pueblo, esta felicidad interna bruta, plantea un modelo de desarrollo distinto. Usted habló de desarrollo, ¿no es cierto? Hablamos de desarrollo, la palabra desarrollo ha sido muy usada. ¿Cuál es ese modelo de desarrollo nuevo? O sea, me da la impresión que aquí emerge una suerte de paradigma nuevo de desarrollo. Un desarrollo distinto a la manera como hemos entendido el desarrollo hasta ahora. ¿Cuál sería este nuevo paradigma? O sea, tengo la impresión de que lo que ustedes han hecho en Bután se adelantó varias décadas a algo que hoy, en medio de una crisis financiera mundial, de un mundo que está complicado por una serie de problemas, un tema medioambiental, una crisis ambiental generalizada, de cambio climático, etcétera, bueno, crisis financiera y económica, movimientos de indignación en los países más desarrollados, gente que sale a la calle a protestar, molestia colectiva, etcétera, etcétera, etcétera. Y parece que recién empezamos nosotros a reformularnos qué es lo que queremos, a dónde queremos ir. Y ustedes dan una primera señal. Tengo la impresión de que es como la primera luz para salir de este túnel oscuro, en que estamos un poco encerrados hoy día. ¿Cuál sería ese nuevo tipo de desarrollo? ¿Cuál sería el nuevo paradigma, la nueva manera de entender el desarrollo del hombre en el futuro? Estoy hablando del hombre global, no solamente del hombre de Bután.
Well, basically, at the global level, Bhutan has been trying to also steer and influence the global development agenda. And basically, we have taken our experience with our approach to development that we call gross national happiness. But at the global development level, we are saying that as a framework to start in trying to construct this new economy, that maybe we should do it within 4 parameters. And this was the meeting we had in 2nd April in New York under the auspices of the UN. And these 4 parameters under which we would like to try and construct with the involvement of a wide cross-section of experts from all around the world and people from all walks of life is firstly that happiness and well-being must be the focus. Secondly, that there must be sustainable use of resources, natural resources. That's the only way to go forward for the new economy we want. Third, that there must be fair distribution as a principle to guide, because if you do not, you will have consequences of not following that principle, which we see all around the world. It is in our enlightened in self-interest to see things and have the right perspective. So fair distribution as one parameter. And lastly, that we must find greater and greater efficiency in all the resources that we use as a guiding principle. So we have laid out these 4 principles, and this will be used to by the commission that we are going to set up. And our hope is to work to a body of work that can be used to influence policies and programs and steer development away from today's GDP and money obsession to a development that can be genuinely sustainable, and more importantly, that when there's progress, people are actually better off and hopefully happier.
Bueno, hablábamos de que se ha usado el término de la religión del dinero para entender un cierto economicismo un poco reductivo, un economicismo que reduce al hombre solamente a su dimensión económica, al homus economicus, como decían los latinos, el hombre económico. Los economistas occidentales, que tienden a ser bastante duros en términos de defender las bases científicas de sus afirmaciones, prácticamente nos hacen sentir de que no hay otra alternativa que la que han planteado los pensamientos económicos tradicionales. ¿Cuál ha sido la reacción de estos economistas? ¿Hay una mayor apertura o miran con desconfianza este índice de felicidad interna bruta? ¿Cuál ha sido su percepción de cómo la ciencia económica occidental, los analistas económicos, que son muy importantes, son los que toman las decisiones, los ministerios de Hacienda, los que manejan las políticas muchas veces de los países? ¿Cuál es la percepción? ¿Se mantiene el prejuicio? ¿Hay una apertura? ¿Cómo lo ve usted?
There is far greater openness today than there ever was. And I think this is why it is such an opportune moment to not only have this discussion, but to actually shift the debate, because now many economists are also taking part in these discussions and realizing the problems of the existing models of development. And you're right, if I just think of 10 years back, there was a lot of skepticism, and basically if you start talking about things like happiness for development, people almost ridicule you. But today, starting from the Economist magazine, when they refer to these developments, they refer to it seriously. And we have Nobel laureates like Joseph Stiglitz, economists like Jeffrey Sachs, and a host of others now involved in this effort to really try and define a new paradigm which looks at not only one aspect, but looks at all the aspects, which clearly separates what's capital from income, so that we can really move down a sustainable path. So in that way, I think things have changed, and even in the whole economics profession, you can see that many are coming on board with these ideas and realizing that there's more than something there.
¿Cómo es posible, conciliar la búsqueda de la felicidad declarada por un Estado, que tiene además un ministro de la felicidad, con la libertad? Uno de los riesgos que uno pudiera ver es que un Estado se proponga llevar a su pueblo la felicidad y que eso significa arriesgar la libertad. Hemos tenido ejemplos en la historia de Occidente de utopías, ideologías que han planteado la felicidad como horizonte y que han terminado en las peores pesadillas: control total, dictaduras de partidos únicos. ¿Cómo se concilia esta necesidad de libertad que es tan apreciada en el Occidente moderno con la búsqueda de una felicidad dirigida por el Estado?
Freedom is valued everywhere. I think that goes without saying. And therefore, whatever we do, even in the name of pursuit of happiness as a development objective, must always respect certain values which are universal, timeless, immutable, like freedom. But even while respecting this, there's a lot of opportunities for government policies to influence choices we make without making the choices for us. You have the freedom to make the choice. For instance, I think a good example is in the developing country context, chlorinating water, drinking water. Why do we chlorinate drinking water? Because if you chlorinate drinking water, it reduces water-related diseases like diarrhea, which are a big killer in our part of the world. And in many rural villages, governments either try to give this chlorine free or sell it for a small price and ask people to put it in the tank. But in cities, we take it for granted, but actually government is putting the chlorine. We are drinking chlorinated water. So these are all aspects which show that there is role for government to play this very, what they call soft paternalism, and influence behavior with as little interference in your freedom. But of course, only for those areas which are well known, well proven, so scientific areas are one. But increasingly we find that there is opportunities for this in a lot of other areas. There is this growing research on human behavior which shows that human beings are not very good at making choices. And yet, the popular rationale behind a lot of economic theory is that human beings are perfect. They'll make decisions which maximize benefit to them. But studies show that doctors who smoke, clearly one example of people who don't make best decisions for themselves. There are a number of areas which show opportunities for government to intervene for the benefit of people, but still letting people make choice. So another example is when you buy a mobile phone, if you check today, most probably most of your settings are on default setting that the factory had made. So in the same way, government can use this knowledge that people are too lazy to change and go with the default option most of the time. So in every policy, you want to enhance saving, you can see what the default choice is for people's behavior. And if policy uses this cleverly, people still have freedom not to save. But because they usually go with the default, they end up saving. So I think there's a lot of opportunities without having to have conflict with a highly held value like freedom, which should never be undermined. But still, government can do many things to enhance quality choices we make, simply by being clever. And also because government is doing it, but today not in a clever way. For instance, when they make a 6-lane highway, they're literally moving you down that road, whereas they could plan it differently and you might behave differently. So it is being done. All we are saying is do it more cleverly to achieve not only the objective of moving people, but actually getting people to connect with each other. Why? Because people also care about human relationships and all these other things I mentioned.
Sí, de hecho yo creo que a veces se ha exacerbado en los últimos decenios el valor, se ha convertido la libertad en un valor absoluto y eso ha llevado muchas veces a la libertad del individuo y a un individualismo y hemos perdido el sentido de comunidad, lo que usted decía al comienzo. Me llama la atención que dentro de los índices que aplica el gobierno de Bután está ver cuánto tiempo o horas le dedicamos a los amigos, el tiempo de conversar, de cultivar la amistad y de establecer vínculos. Hablemos un poco de la importancia del sentido de lo comunitario y de la relación con los otros en la búsqueda de la felicidad.
I think this is key. As I was saying earlier, this is what we draw real meaning and purpose in life from, our interaction with others. Loved one, family, friends, colleagues. It is at the heart of everything we do. And I think, therefore, it is very important that policymakers in particular be mindful of this aspect. Because as you say, if you are not mindful, we are beginning to erode it. And in the Buddhist context, what you find is the institution of family in particular is very important. And if policies can be made to support the strengthening of that institution, it can lead to better outcomes for society. And the reason is obvious, family is one of the most natural institutions. If you think about greatest influences on yourself as you're growing up, it actually came more from family rather than from school alone. But today in this modernized world where both parents have to go to work, this is getting eroded. Our children are being looked after by domestic help, or we depend on the education system to be both teacher providing knowledge and parents trying to provide values. But we know from our own life that actually family is the best place to really impart the values, especially through the behavior of the parents. And I believe that if even as you get richer, if you're feeling poorer in terms of happiness, it's because these important things are being lost. And yet this is what is most important. I'm sure most people, if I say, tomorrow is your last day, what's the most important thing? They'll not think about jobs and all. They'll probably think about their loved ones, their parents, their children. And yet, a lot of our policies is weakening that. And I think this is where, in our search to have a development that is balanced, we need to review a whole lot of policies and to find the right balance so that the problems we see today do not happen. Unrealistic expectation from education school to provide knowledge and look after children, take on all the roles which traditionally families used to share, and families only devoting their time to work. It's a lose-lose. Everyone is losing. The children are losing, the families are losing. Overall, even the government is losing. Because families who are stressed as a result, who are unhappy as a result, it's proven that happy workers make better workers. Stressed workers don't make better workers, but that's how most of us are today.
La familia, y también me interesa mucho que se mida el tiempo dedicado a la amistad. Hay un escritor chileno que habla de la religión de la amistad. O sea, la amistad es algo sagrado que hay que cuidar. Y cada vez se tiene menos tiempo para conversar. En nuestra sociedad, por lo menos tiempo para sentarse a conversar gratuitamente, no con un fin utilitario. ¿Cuán importante es la amistad culturalmente en Bután y qué papel juega en la felicidad humana la amistad?
I think friendship is universal. Basically, the focus on family and friends is very important because that is the source of unconditional relationship, unconditional interaction. In a sense, you could say the only interaction which is pure. There's no money involved. There's no reciprocity involved. It's just a genuine wanting to give because you have a deeper bond. And I think that's simply important. And I feel that probably that is true for every society. Bhutanese, Chinese, Chileans definitely, Latin American, but I think every society. But today the sad part is a lot of that is being, the opportunity for that is being reduced simply because of the demand on time. And which is why we focus on work-life balance. The time use, 8 hours of work, 8 hours of rest, and 8 hours of leisure. This is very important. And today you have very good examples of society which are making deliberate decisions to maintain this balance. So in the West, the best examples are France. I was mentioning yesterday that France and US have the same level of productivity. But the income of Americans is far higher. And the only reason is they work longer. Because the French people have decided that they want to work a 35-hour week and they want the good life. So I think as a society, it's important to identify what you value and align the use of your time to that. That is a recipe for happiness. And this is important for societies to recognize and begin making that demand from your lawmakers.
Lo que menos tenemos, o sea, paradójicamente la tecnología nos debiera llevar a tener más tiempo y pareciera subjetivamente que uno tiene cada vez menos tiempo y que el tiempo es un valor escaso, es un bien escaso para hablar en términos económicos, que va a valer oro, tener tiempo, pero tiempo para cosas inútiles entre comillas, para cosas gratuitas, para la contemplación, para salir a pisar las hojas en otoño. ¿Qué importancia tiene ese tiempo usado no en lo directamente eficaz y eficiente, sino en lo gratuito?
I think a lot of that is actually wasteful time. A lot of time, for instance, many people spend on Facebook. It's actually quite wasteful because the friends you make on Facebook are not the type of friends with whom you have a relationship forever. In fact, some people claim that they have 20,000 friends, and if they log off for a week, not one person calls them, because that's a different kind of relationship. And when we talk about friends, when we talk about families, as I was saying, we are talking about those with whom we share such a deep bond for unconditional interaction, love. And this is very different from what technology is sort of creating today. And I think technology is value neutral. It's neither good nor bad. It's how you use it. You must have the discipline to use it in the way it best enhances your life. It best strengthens communication between, making you keep in touch with you and your loved ones. Like credit card, it's a very convenient, but if used badly, it can land you in a lot of problems. But it's not doing anything, it's yourself. And maybe what we need to do increasingly as part of the educational system is focus on this whole new set of skills that people need to deal with this new world. Because Facebook and all have come, but in our schools we are still teaching the old things, and people don't realize these two are totally different, that a friendship in life and a friend on Facebook is two different things. But no one is there to tell them. And I think this is why I feel that there's a whole opportunity to review and renew how we conduct education. And in Bhutan also, we have started taking a serious look. We see that education and what people need in terms of skills and knowledge, there's a big gap. And especially with the predominant role of technology in our lives, I think this must be filled fast. The education system must catch up.
Un gran sabio, que fue Lao Tzu, autor del Tao Te Ching, aconsejando, porque una de las medidas del buen gobierno, una de las medidas para medir la felicidad es el buen gobierno, ¿no es así? En los índices que ustedes plantearon. Y Lao Tse aconseja a un gobernante gobernar el mundo del mismo modo en que cocinaría un pescado pequeño, o sea, no dándole tantas vueltas en la cacerola como para que llegue a desintegrarse. ¿Mm? Y escribe lo siguiente, Lao Tse imagina un estado ideal, y se lo imagina que no es más grande que una aldea. El estado ideal sería una aldea. Y yo pensé en Bután, que es un país pequeño, que correspondería perfecto al modelo de Lao Tse. Y dice Lao Tse, supongamos que existe un pequeño estado con unas pocas personas. Aunque existan diversos artefactos mecánicos, no serán utilizados. La gente será consciente de su mortalidad y de su imposibilidad de prolongarse en el tiempo. Aunque posean embarcaciones y carruajes, no viajarán en ellos. Aunque posean armas, no las exhibirán. Restablecerán el uso de las cuerdas y los nudos para llevar sus cuentas. Estarán satisfechos con su comida, contentos con sus ropas, cómodos en sus hogares, felices con sus costumbres. Aunque los estados vecinos se encuentren al alcance de la vista y el canto de los gallos y el ladrido de los perros al alcance del oído, la gente no emigrará en toda su vida. Al leer este fragmento de Lao Tse pensé mucho en Bután. Tengo aquí el escudo de Bután, que es muy hermoso, y la tengo también por acá, se la podemos mostrar. La hermosa bandera de Bután, que es un dragón, ¿no? Usted no nos lo puede explicar, tal vez.
Peaceful dragon.
¿Cuál es la historia, el origen de esta bandera?
We considered the dragon kingdom, and actually the dragon, we call it the thunder dragon because we have a lot of thunder in Bhutan. And basically it's in Buddhism there's a lot of symbology, and symbols are very powerful, and the dragon is actually a symbol of purity, but of also strength, of wealth. And the colors yellow and red signify harmony between spirituality and secular governance.
¿Qué piensa de este pensamiento de Lao Tse sobre el buen gobernar, el buen gobierno?
No, I think the underlying wisdom of what he's trying to say is what in modern governance we are all trying to promote, local governance. That as much as possible, based on the principle of subsidiarity, that people should make decisions for things that will affect them. That should be the way decision making should be divided between national, subnational and local governments. And increasingly a good indicator of democracy is a growing level of authority being given to local governments. And I think that aligns perfectly to the wisdom of Lao Tse that if you can devolve decision making to local levels, that they will make the best decisions, which then will lead to the likely things he mentioned about a very healthy village, harmonious village. Need to migrate is less because people have deep root, they have good quality of life, they help each other. So I think his wisdom many thousands of years back, but it's actually, it's very much that something we pursue in the name of good governance even today.
Yo quiero agradecer a Karma Tshiteem por su visita a Chile, agradecer al Reino de Bután por este regalo que le ha hecho al mundo de este índice muy original que es la felicidad interna bruta, que complementa y mejora el PIB al cual hemos sido un poco prisioneros de él durante tantas décadas. Quizás porque vivimos periodos de depresión económica en Occidente que hicieron que nos obsesionáramos por el desarrollo económico. Decir también que lo que ha hecho Bután es un ejemplo para el mundo. De hecho, Naciones Unidas ya ha asumido esto como una tarea. En Chile, el PNUD ha hecho ya un informe de desarrollo humano y está por hacer otro, usando como inspiración también este modelo. O sea, hay señales optimistas de que el hombre por fin, a partir de lo que han enseñado sus grandes maestros, Buda, Lao Tse, Jesús, que por fin los hayamos escuchado o los podamos escuchar para poder alcanzar esa tan anhelada felicidad. Quiero agradecerle su presencia aquí en Una Belleza Nueva y en Chile. Muchas gracias por haber conversado conmigo.
Thank you very much for having me, Christian, and all the best.